Today we're here on a beautiful day in Paris at the American Cathedral in Paris with my old classmate Mark Edington, who's the Bishop of the Convocation of Episcopal Churches in Europe. So it's a very, very interesting lunch conversation that we just had. But one of the things I didn't ask you about, Mark, but which I think a lot about is you've come to Europe and you've been in New England for so long. And I wonder just how the piety and the spirituality and the faith of the people that you see in Europe is kind of changing your own experience of just what faith is.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question, Malcolm. So I guess the first thing I'd say is a really important difference between the culture that we're used to for the church to live in America and here is France and Europe generally are just radically more secular than the world in which we raised and the world in which our church takes for granted as normal. Here, it's not unusual for people to look oddly at me if I'm dressed like this, and for us to have to justify ourselves to the police. We have to ask for a warrant of religious validity every 5 years. We're not tax exempt. None of our churches in Europe are. So it's just a very different place for us to be the church. But the gift in that is to force us to reflect more deeply on what is distinctive about our church and why do we value this place where we get to develop our spiritual lives and learn about prayer and understand why these things are essential to our understanding of a fully human life. So it's an interesting challenge being the church in a place that it's not native at all, but it's also a beautiful, beautiful place to do ministry.
Yeah, I know it's funny, when we were walking in the gateway through the tower here, you said before 2001 that you flew an American flag and a French flag.
That's right.
And the prefecture said, take them down.
After the attacks of September 11th, there was a concern that the building would become a target.
Yeah.
And so all of the sort of national identity that was associated with the American Cathedral was removed. And now, as you see, we fly an Episcopal flag and the flag of the Anglican Communion. And it's true that, there has been a rise, certainly here in France. France has suffered many terrorist attacks, especially here in Paris, also in Nice and other places in the country. And one of the reactions to that, which we see happening politically now, is the rise of the far right in France, which is very anti-immigration and particularly anti-Islam. There are 8 million Muslims here in France. It's the largest community of Muslims outside the Muslim world of any country in the world. And I mean, we are in very healthy and strong interfaith relationships with our Muslim neighbors here. But there is an element in French society that finds that to be contrary to French culture, especially to the radical separation between the state and any religious belief. And so, entities that are churches or religious organizations are really forced to live under a lot of scrutiny and we have to answer a lot of questions to the authorities to do what we do here.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things to me during lunch was you talking about just having to justify income that arrives to the cathedral above a certain amount. It has to have a board of directors. They have to say where those funds came from. That these rules that have been passed to kind of make life more difficult for Muslim populations is making things more difficult for Christians who may not,
That's true, and we're happy to be painted with the same brush. We are not asking for
special
treatment
treatment.
at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
We also know that with the decline in America's official presence in Europe, when I first came to study in Europe as an undergraduate, there were 380,000 American troops in Germany. Today, there's 1/10 of that. So as the official presence of Americans in Europe has greatly declined, our role, the Episcopal Church's role, as representing something about our country, even though we're not the national church, we still represent an idea about the place of religion in the public square, about the legitimacy of our spiritual commitments in our lives as citizens. And all of that is something we represent here. And we feel it's a more important role for us now as the sort of official presence of America has declined over the past years.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing about just the difference between the Anglican churches and the Episcopal Church. It's just the democratic polity of the Episcopal Church in America. It's just a huge difference that we so often take for granted, but Heidi and I are taking for granted much less now that we're meeting with so many Anglican church leaders.
That's right. So here in Europe, you actually have 5 overlapping jurisdictions of the Anglican Church. It's the only place on the planet where that is true. The Episcopal Church has been present here since 1815, and in an organized way since 1858. The Church of England is present here, because wherever there's a British embassy, there is a chaplaincy of the Church of England. That's what it means to be an established church. But also, we're in communion with the old Catholic churches of the Union of Utrecht. I just came this week from a meeting with those bishops, and we have been since the Bonn Agreement. So those are Anglican partners. And there's the Spanish Reformed Episcopal Church in Spain, the Lusitanian Catholic Apostolic Evangelical Church in Portugal. There are 5 Anglican churches here in Europe. What makes us distinct is, as you say, the nature of our polity, which is the product of our revolution, and the idea that we didn't really like the idea of bishops without constraints on their authority. So I have a very different job from my brother, who's the bishop in the Church of England, and I have a very different kind of church to share the governance of with my colleagues on my council of advice.
Yeah, well, I loved our conversation so much, and one of the things that Mark said during lunch was that the churches in Europe are kind of the research and development arm of Anglican Christianity, and I love that idea of just this being an experimental place.
We really believe that. We believe that we're the laboratory, one of the laboratories for the future of our church. We here are 21 congregations that are managing to be the Episcopal Church in a place that is radically secularized, where the church is often not regarded as a charity, not given tax-exempt status, often regarded with suspicion, frankly, where we're not a part of the historic narratives about religion of any of these countries. Nobody cares that George Washington sat in our pews if you're here, but also our churches here are radically multi-ethnic, multilingual. Americans are now a minority in all of the churches in the Convocation. So we are learning how to be the church in a very different environment, one in which we think will come to be true of the United States in 40 or 50 years. So we think we have something to offer back to the wider church about how to be a church under those circumstances, and we're eager to have conversation partners to have that talk with.
Well, I'm so glad for this conversation together. I'm here with Mark Edington, the Bishop of the European, the Convocation of the Episcopal Church in Europe. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California. And thanks for watching More Good News.